Hey, what's up you guys, it's Connor, and today I'm going to be wrapping up the last books that I read in 2018. I know this video is a little bit delayed, but I got sick in December, and I just took a little bit of a break from making YouTube videos and everything like that. I did get engaged in November, and I haven't really made too many videos after that, so now I am engaged, and I'm going to be planning a wedding this year, so it's going to be busy because I'm still in law school. So I'll do my best to be consistent, but I also have some personal things that I need to stay on top of. But anyway, let's wrap up the last books that I read in 2018, not this year. The 117th thing that I read in 2018 is The Lost Continent by Sutherland. This is book 11 of the Wings of Fire series. If you guys don't know, the Wings of Fire series is set up in arcs of 5 books. So the first arc finished with book 5, then the second one with book 10, and then this one is starting a new problem with some new characters. In the first arc of this series, 5 dragonettes are prophesized to end this big conflict that has been happening in their world, Pyria. 3 Sandwing queens have been fighting with each other, trying to be the queen of the Sandwings, the overall queen, and so it has pulled in all of the other different types of dragons into this conflict and has created lots of problems. And these 5 dragonettes are the ones that were predicted to choose which queen was going to be the overall winner of this war. Obviously, there's been quite a few books since that first book, so I can't really go into too many of the details with this one, but I did really enjoy the inclusion of some new different types of dragons because we're on a different continent. Some of the characters overlap, so I definitely don't suggest just jumping into this one. There's a prequel out that's called Darkstalker, and I definitely recommend reading that before going into this as well, because one of the characters in that prequel novel affects a lot of things that happen in this book. So I don't think that you would appreciate everything that's going on in this unless you've had all of that knowledge from the first 10 books plus the prequel novel. Anyway, this one follows a few dragonettes. One of them is the most frustrating thing because he has very low self-confidence and he's very wary. He definitely does not jump into decision making. He takes his time and is more methodical about things, and he also just totally buys into his society's way of thinking, which other characters do not. So you end up getting frustrated with him, but you know, you're supposed to be getting frustrated with him. I really liked a lot of the characters. I really liked this character named Cricket. Blue is the one that was making me annoyed. Cricket is this one dragon that doesn't fit in with her tribe, and I don't want to go into too many things because I don't want to spoil you, but she's great. She always asks all of the questions that I had while I was reading. So she's kind of like a check on this series to make sure that things are staying within the bounds of the laws of this world. Because at the end of the second arc, things started getting a little crazy and a little bit all over the place, and it seemed like she was losing control of the series. Sutherland was, but she's kind of roped it in and has retaken control with this one. So I definitely recommend this series. It's one of my favorite middle grade series of all time. I've talked about it a ton on my channel, obviously because I've been reading the books for years. I definitely recommend this one. One last thing is that I do think that this one is going to be more integrated with the other books that have already come out as the series continues. So yeah, don't just jump into this one. After that, I read Sojourn by Salvatore. This is the 3rd book in the Dark Elf Trilogy. I actually did a series review for this first trilogy chronologically set in the Forgotten Realms by Salvatore. So I'll leave that up in the card symbol if you want to check it out and know more. I think that you should read the series in publication order, but I like to read things usually chronologically. Like, I read the Chronicles of Narnia chronologically, and I prefer doing it that way. The Edge Chronicles, those should be read chronologically, but these should be read in publication order. So I don't recommend starting with this trilogy. I recommend starting with the Icewind Dale trilogy and then going back and reading this one if you're curious. Anyway, this trilogy follows a character named Dristoerden. At the beginning of this trilogy, he is living in Menzoberranzan, which is a city where Dark Elves live, and the Dark Elves are very violent people, and they're a matriarchal society, so all of the women of the society run things and force the men to do their bidding kind of thing. Then throughout the series, you meet a whole bunch of different characters. Drist goes on tons of adventures. It's just very tropey fantasy that I was wanting to read at the time when I read this. The 3rd book specifically becomes a little bit episodic, and he just bops around from person to person trying to find where he belongs. He just wants to be accepted by, like, anyone. I think one thing that this does well is it sets the ground for a lot of things to happen in the future. It sets up relationships between Drizzt and different groups of people throughout this world. It also starts to set up the world a little bit more so you're kind of understanding where things are in relation to each other. I don't think that it's the best thing out there ever. So I ended up giving Sojourn specifically 3 stars, and I think that I gave the overall trilogy like 3.5 or something like that. If you know what you're getting in for before you go into it, I think you'll still really enjoy it, but it's not like mind-blowing or anything like that, but it is a fun time. After that, I picked up The Shadow Club by Neal Shusterman. This is Neal Shusterman's first published novel. I think it was published in 1992. It follows a group of kids who are second best in things, and then throughout the course of this story, they're trying to play pranks on the first best kids. Does that make sense? Did I say that right? They play pranks on the kids that are better at them in their main sport or hobby. So the main character is a runner, and the club plays pranks on the runner who is faster than him. These pranks escalate and become bullying and escalate even more. So know that before going in, but I hated every single character. Like, I hated every single person. I hated the Shadow Club, I hated the kids that they were picking on, I hated all the adults in this story, and I think that you were supposed to hate them. So I think Neal Shusterman did a good job there. I actually did an individual book review for this, so I'll leave that up in the card symbol if you want to check it out. Since I know that this is going to be a pretty long video, I'm just going to cut myself off there. I ended up giving this 4 stars. I definitely enjoyed it, and I now have the sequel to this book, so I'll be reading that at some point in 2019. After that, I read The One and Only Ivan by Catherine Applegate, I believe is her name. This one follows a bunch of different animal characters that are living inside of a mall. This is back when you were allowed to keep wild animals in malls as kind of like an attraction. So Ivan is this gorilla, and he's living in this mall. He's been living there for quite some time. He was raised by the human that now has him living in this mall situation. And basically people come by and watch him paint or watch the other animals do different performance things that they've been taught. It's a pretty miserable existence for them. They don't live in the best of conditions. They aren't fed the correct food. They are not given enough exercise, all of those different things. And on top of that, they're actually making the owners less and less money because less and less people are coming to check them out and see these animals. It's written in the perspective of Ivan, so you get a lot of his thoughts and feelings about what's going on and how he doesn't understand exactly what's happening because he's not a human. It's a commentary on keeping animals in captivity without providing them the things that they need to thrive. And so I think that this book had a lot of great messages. A lot of people love this novel. I got emotionally invested in these animals. I wanted Ivan to be happy. I wanted all of the characters around him to be happy. I was getting upset when bad things would happen to them. So I definitely was invested in this novel, and I had a good time while reading it. I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars, I believe. And it's one of those popular middle grade novels that I definitely understand why it is so popular and well beloved. The writing was really solid. You get invested in the characters. You get invested in what's happening to them. So overall, it's a really good time. As I said, 4 stars. After that, I read Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. This is the second book in the Red Rising trilogy that has now been continued on to more than that. I think there's 5 books out now. If you guys somehow don't know, this one follows this character named Darrow. I can't remember how to say his name. But in the science fiction society, people are segregated into different groups, all based off of colors. And so the golds are at the top of the food chain, basically, and the reds are at the very bottom. The main character, Darrow, I'm gonna say Darrow, is one of the reds, so he is at the bottom of society. He doesn't even realize how terrible they're being treated. He thinks that he's doing something noble by working so hard in these mines, but then he finds out later on that society has actually been flourishing above their heads while they've been trapped underground, and he decides to try to take revenge on the Golds and on the society for everything that happens at the beginning of the first book. I did an individual review of the first book, so I'll leave that up in the card symbol if you want to check it out. This one actually has a time jump that happens in between books 1 and 2, so I think like a year or a year and a half has passed since the ending of the first book, which was really confusing at the very start because I didn't know what was happening. I didn't really remember all these characters that we'd actually never met before, so I was confused because it wasn't that long ago that I read Red Rising. I was having a hard time keeping track because there was a time jump and you were just thrown into the story. Basically, Darrow is just trying to stay afloat after the events of the first book, and he's trying to tread water and make sure that he doesn't get found out because obviously he would be killed. I think that this book suffers a little bit from middle book syndrome because not all that much that happens in this matters in the grand scheme of the story. Like, there wasn't that much that I was like, oh yeah, that might come back. Like, at the end of this book, I was like, I could have just read the last 100 pages and been a-okay. I didn't love this as much as I was hoping to. I think I gave it 3 or 3.5 stars. I did really enjoy the first one, but this one wasn't as good as that first one for me. And I think that this one was just a filler book. Sorry if you love this book. I then read Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. I actually listened to this one as an audiobook. I think Elizabeth Gilbert narrates it herself, if I'm not mistaken on that. Anyway, Elizabeth Gilbert has a very interesting take on what creativity is and how creativity works. Basically, she believes that creativity is, I don't know how to describe it, like an entity, like a entity that you can't see and you can't physically interact with, but it comes to people that are receptive to them and gives them ideas to then go off and do. She describes it as a contractual relationship, so you contract with a creative spirit to do this one task. If you keep your word and you work really hard on this one project, your creativity stays with you, but if you kind of break your contract and you don't work as hard on it, or you put it on the back burner, then the creativity leaves you and can go to someone else. And she has examples of this happening in her life and other people's lives as well, but it was just very interesting. Again, it's just a very interesting take on how creativity works and how creativity interacts with our lives and everything like that. I ended up giving it 3 stars just because I don't, like, believe that, but it was worth the read because she actually did talk about Brene Brown in that book, and after that, I read a book by Brene Brown. So it was like this weird thing that it was like the perfect time to read that book for me, but I did end up giving it 3 stars. It's just interesting. It's not a very long audiobook either, so I definitely recommend reading it that way. As I said, after reading Big Magic, I read Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. I freaking love Brene Brown. I'm a huge fan. I've watched her TED Talks. I've watched some interviews that people have done with her. I've read a couple of her books. Earlier in 2018, I read Braving the Wilderness, which at the time I think was her most recent book to have come out. And then I was like, I want to read Daring Greatly. I put a hold on the library like 3 months before it actually came in. And when it came in, I was so excited that I just sped read the whole thing. Basically, she talks about how to dare greatly, you have to allow yourself to be vulnerable. You're not going to achieve anything without at some point being vulnerable. And she also talks a lot about shame in that because she's a shame researcher. She definitely harps on certain things like how humans are hardwired for connection and that you are deserving of love and belonging. So I think that the book and the audiobook could be a little bit repetitive on that, but I did really enjoy hearing her stories. Daring Greatly is definitely like a self-help style of book. A lot of her books are similar to that, but she doesn't make it seem like she's telling you from above. Like, she's also trying to better herself as you're reading this book, thinking about your life and reflecting on certain things. So I really liked that. And I just loved this book so much. I ended up giving it 5 stars. I actually started to reread it recently, but I think my audiobook hold from the library is going to expire soon, so I'll have to eventually go back to that one. But I did start rereading it already, and that's how much I really enjoyed it. So I gave that one 5 stars. The 124th thing that I read in 2018 is Wrath of the Dragon King by Brandon Mull. This is the second book in the Dragonwatch series, which is a sequel series to the Fablehaven series. You should not read the Dragonwatch series until you've read Fablehaven because it is a direct continuation. You follow the same 2 main characters and you follow them after the events of the 5th and final book of the Fablehaven series. I actually did a book review for the first book in this series as well, and I'll leave that up in the card symbol if you want to check it out. I didn't love this one as much. I think it's just because of everything that was happening while I was reading this. Like, for instance, I was reading this book when I got engaged, so it kind of got pushed to the back burner, and then I had to go back to it and get back into the story and everything like that. I still think that this series is super fun. I love learning about the dragons and learning about Seth and Kendra in this world and how they're navigating everything, and I love that things from the first series keep popping back up so that you can see the connections. I liked the game thing that happens in the middle of this book. I don't want to say anything because I don't want to spoil you, but that was really fun. I mean, there was a lot of cool elements in here that I was just really enjoying. These books are also illustrated. So there is one of the illustrations. It's got a little satyr on it with a, ooh, was it an eagle? I can't remember the name of the bird that's in the story. So there are illustrations in here which make it extra fun, and I just love Brandon Mull and I love the Fablehaven series, and I love the Dragonwatch series. So I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I gave the first book 5 stars. So I didn't love it as much, but that could be totally my fault because I could have read it a lot quicker and sped through it and been really engrossed in it. But because I was on vacation and was doing other things, I kind of put this one on the back burner. So that could be my fault. After that, I listened to Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neal deGrasse Tyson. The reason why I wanted to read this one is because Tony wants to read this book. He loves Neal deGrasse Tyson, and I also know that my brother has this book and wants to read it as well. I think that he realized that he wasn't ready to read it, but I hadn't realized that before jumping in. Basically, Astrophysics for People in a Hurry is that. It just talks about different astrophysics things, but a lot of them ended up going over my head because I don't have any type of like basic knowledge of astrophysics. So at the very beginning, he's talking about all these different types of particles, and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, and I know you're describing it to me, but I'm not understanding what you're saying. So I think that this book is one that once you have that basic knowledge, you can go into it and really get a lot from it. But because I don't have that basic knowledge, I was not able to get much out of this. I think that it will also be better for me on a reread where I can know what he's talking about, or have the time to look up the different things that he's talking about and use the book as a basis for jumping off and learning more. So it's either one of those. If you have the time and the ability to write down what he's saying and then look it up, that would work. Or if you have the basis already, he might be able to make more connections for you between these different topics. I just was not ready for it. So I ended up giving it 3 stars, but I think that if I were to reread it later, I would probably give it a little bit of a higher rating. I just don't have that basis to understand what he's saying. Although the second half of the book is a lot more understandable than the first half. So there's a lot of particle talk in the first half, but the second half, he's talking about humans in the universe and how that works. And so I think that the second half for me was a little bit more enjoyable than the first, but in the end, I ended up giving it 3 stars. I then picked up Furies of Calderon by Jim Butcher. This is the first book in the Codex Alera series. I actually also listened to this one as an audiobook, on audiobook. So this one is interesting because this book was kind of started off as a joke. Like, I think what happened was someone challenged Jim Butcher to write a story about Pokemon and like certain other aspects that were included in the book. I don't remember exactly what someone told me, but yeah, so it was kind of started as a joke or like a challenge, and it kind of shows. You can predict exactly what's going to happen after the first couple chapters. It follows this one kid who's living in this small village. He's living with his uncle and aunt. He's trying to prove himself, and he's trying to prove himself as an adult, as a man, so that he can go off and start his own herd and start making money and, you know, start courting women. So he's doing all of that, and then there's also a couple of other characters that you follow. One is a guard for the king. It's been a little while since I read this one. She ends up interacting with this kid, and then there's also this other guy that comes into the mix, and it's just a high fantasy adventure story where there is a civil war that's lingering in the background, and a lot of disgruntled populations within this kingdom are kind of starting to think about their different options when it comes to leaders. And the Pokemon aspect of this book is that people have what's called Furies, and they're different elementals, and some people have a couple, some people only have one. The strange thing about our main kid character is that he doesn't have any, and he's kind of older. People don't think that he's ever going to get any Furies, and so he's like the least powered in this world, but he's got a greater destiny kind of thing. I definitely really enjoyed his aunt. His aunt is so great and is so strong and just takes no nonsense from anyone, so I was really enjoying certain characters and certain plot threads, but it is very predictable, so I don't know. I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. I had a really good time, and I probably will continue at some point. Obviously, I'll have to refamiliarize myself with the different characters because I can't think of any of their names off the top of my head, and I don't have the book here because I read it as an audiobook. But if you're looking for some more tropey fantasy, that's probably one that would be fun to check out. I then read Quiet by Susan Cain. This is a nonfiction book that I think the subtitle is The Power of Introverts in a World That Won't Stop Talking. I actually watched her TED Talk and then jumped into the novel because I wanted to read more about what she was saying. She's basically saying in this book that especially in the United States, extroverts are preferred over introverts, and that might be a huge mistake and might cause problems financially and just as a society. Introverts definitely have their place, and as readers, most readers, are more introverted. It's one where you will definitely be able to relate to things that she's saying. I was like, oh my gosh, that is me, when she was talking about different traits of introverts. And she just talks about how they're overlooked and that's a bad thing. Workplaces and schools should be set up in a way that allows everyone to thrive and allows the greatest amount of creative thinking and creative problem solving without being detrimental to the different types of people that are out there in the world. She tackles things like group projects and open space floor plans for office buildings. She talks about how corporations are set up, or just like firms in general are set up, and how they value the loudest, most charismatic person in the room when that's not always the person that's gonna lead you down the correct path. So it's just a lot of food for thought. I loved this book. I actually gave it 4 stars when I first finished it, but the more people that I talked to about it and the more things that popped back into my brain that I had already read in the novel, the more and more I love this book, and I kind of want to go back and reread it just to really soak in everything that she's saying. At the beginning of the book, it seems a little bit anti-extrovert, which is not what she's trying to say, but it did kind of seem like that at the very beginning, and then she comes back and she's like, no, we need everyone to work together how they work best. Introverts need the time and the space to kind of go off on their own and think about what they're doing and think about how they're contributing, and then come back and contribute those things. I think it was really well written and well researched. She talks about Harvard a lot in it. I don't know if she went to Harvard, but she does talk about how Harvard is set up specifically and how they value extroverts over introverts a lot at Harvard. So I don't know, I just thought it was really interesting. So I gave it 4 stars, but I think that I might bump that up. Especially if I reread it and love it just as much as I am currently, I will probably bump it up to 5. But yeah, really enjoyed that one. Definitely recommend that one for the introverted people in your life. And she obviously talks about how there's no pure introvert or pure extrovert. You can, there's a whole range of people. So don't feel like you're one or the other. You can be in the middle, you can be whatever you want. But yeah, definitely enjoyed that one. Recommend it. The final book that I read in 2018 was actually a comic book. I read Curse Words Volume 2. I was sent this by my fiance's sister, so thank you, Angela. Actually, as I'm filming this, this is her birthday. This one follows this wizard who is sent to Earth to destroy Earth, but instead he decides that he likes it on Earth, so he wants to live there instead of living where he lived before. The guy who sent him to Earth obviously is not happy with this, so he starts sending other witches, magicians, I can't remember what they're called, to come and kill him. He ends up fighting them and everything like that. And this wizard, I think his name is Wizord, with an O, is actually really terrible at being a good person. So the way that he ends up saving people actually may harm them. He has this twisted view and it's not very moral, but it is a very funny and humorous comic book that I've been really enjoying. I really like the artwork as well. It's got some very bold lines and some good coloring. So I will be continuing with this series when I get my hands on the 3rd book, and I'll let you guys know what I think of the series as it continues along. But this one I did give 4 stars because I'm still really enjoying it. So those are all the books that I read in the year of 2018. The next wrap up will be the books that I started and have finished in 2019. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up and comment down below what you guys have been up to recently, because I haven't talked to you guys in a while. Are there any books that you read towards the end of the year or the beginning of this year that you would recommend? If you've read any of these books, let me know what you thought down below, and I will talk to you guys next time.